The leather of Grandpa's Cadillac was always cool and soothing, a small comfort after grueling soccer practices. It was our routine. He would pick me up, ask me how my day was, and drive home. That day, the air was filled with a fall chill, and I was especially exhausted, looking forward to the quiet companionship and soothing ride home. "Watch this, kiddo," Grandpa said, bringing his phone screen to life and turning on a video of some old baseball game. He always had a penchant for the classics, for moments frozen in time that spoke of a simpler past. I grabbed my phone, indulging him, and settled into the passenger seat. As the video went on, I watched only halfway through, barely managing to scroll through the soccer game in my head, thinking about what I could have done better. Then a text notification popped up on the screen, overlapping the black and white footage of baseball legends. The message brought me back to the present, which was in stark contrast to the nostalgia of the video. "Urban Rose, I loved the time we spent together." My heart raced. The grandmother's name wasn't Urban Rose. Who was this woman sending my grandfather such intimate messages? Curiosity, that gnawing beast, took hold of me, and before I knew it, my fingers, betraying common sense, clicked on the thread of the message. The texts were a mixture of ordinariness and undeniable affection. They spoke of encounters, shared laughter, and moments that should have no place in the life of a man who had been married to my grandmother for 4 decades. Grandpa responded with equal warmth, his messages peppered with smiley kisses that seemed to scream betrayal. The baseball video was coming to an end, and the cheers of the crowd came from the phone speaker, filling the car and reminding me that time was running out. I quickly locked the screen and handed the phone back to my grandfather, 1,000 questions swirling around in my head and my heart heavy with a secret I never wanted to carry around. "Good game, huh?" Grandpa's voice brought me out of my reverie, his eyes still fixed on the road. "Yeah, awesome," I mumbled, and the lie was bitter on my tongue. We drove the rest of the way in silence, which was in stark contrast to our usual banter. I couldn't bring myself to speak, each word stuck in my throat, clouded by the looming presence of that message. At home, I retreated to my room, a room that had always felt like a sanctuary to me, now suffocating with the weight of what I knew. I turned to the computer, and the glow of the screen became a pale imitation of comfort. I needed advice, a clue as to how to navigate this minefield I had stumbled into. I posted about my predicament on Reddit. Anonymity was a thin veil of protection. As I hit the submit button, I realized there was no turning back. I had shared a secret, splashed it out into the digital abyss, hoping for a lifeline. The options lay before me: meet my grandfather, tell my grandmother, confide in my parents, or remain silent. Grandpa was 67 years old, and his attitude toward me was never warm and often ended in the harshness that comes from a lifetime of unspoken frustrations. What could I say to him? How could I confront the man who had been the backbone of our family but now seemed like a stranger? Notifications flashed on the screen. The Reddit community was beginning to voice their opinions on my dilemma. I leaned back in my chair. The fate of my family's harmony now depended on what I chose next. The glow of the computer screen faded as I leaned back in my chair, each new notification a reminder of the decision that had weighed heavily on my shoulders. I scrolled through the comments, the voices of strangers echoing in the silence of my room. With each piece of advice, my heart sank lower and lower, the gravity of the situation becoming more real, more suffocating. Days turned into weeks, and the secret I was keeping grew heavier, a tangible presence that followed me everywhere. At the dinner table, I would catch my grandfather's gaze and quickly avert my eyes, while the image of a text message burned on my eyelids. Grandma's laughter, which had once been the melody that filled our home, now sounded to me like a refrain, a prelude to the sad tune she had yet to hear. I watched them together, their light banter, their gentle touches that spoke of a lifetime, and I felt like an intruder. I held a piece of their puzzle that didn't fit, a dark secret that could unravel the tapestry of trust and love they had woven over the years. My parents noticed how I changed, how withdrawn I became, how I smiled forcefully and laughed hollowly. They asked if everything was okay, and their concern was a well-meaning burden that added to the burden I was already carrying. I soothed them with half-truths, hating the deception, but unable to reveal the true cause of my anxiety. At night, I lay awake, and the shadows in my room turned into ghosts of doubt and guilt. What if my grandmother already suspected? What if my silence was complicity in Grandpa's betrayal? The questions chased each other in endless circles, turning into a merry-go-round of anxiety that I couldn't get out of. After much deliberation, I decided I couldn't tell Grandma without more proof. The idea that I might be wrong, that I might wrongly accuse Grandpa, was a risk I couldn't take. And telling my parents meant shifting the weight from my shoulders to theirs, and I wasn't ready for that burden. I carried the secret with me, a silent companion in my daily life. Soccer practice lost its luster. The ball was no longer a source of joy, only a distraction that barely concealed my worries. Schoolwork became a blur, the letters and numbers on the page blending into a meaningless mishmash. Finally, I ventured into a direct conversation with my grandfather. It was a daunting prospect, but the only way that seemed to offer any solution. I needed to hear the truth from him, to understand the reason, to know what this urban rose meant to him. I chose a day when I knew we would be alone and the rest of the family would be gone on their separate errands. I waited for the sound of the hushed car engine, the slamming of the front door that heralded Grandpa's return from his morning walk. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs as I descended the stairs, each step bringing me closer to a confrontation for which I had no script. "Grandpa," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "can we talk?" He looked up from the newspaper, his reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose. "Sure, kid. What's on your mind?" The kitchen, usually filled with warmth and delicious smells, seemed cold and foreign. I took a deep breath, and the words I'd rehearsed came out in a rush. "It's about a message I saw on your phone, from someone named Urban Rose." The silence that followed was deafening, and the ticking of the kitchen clock was a metronome counting down the seconds of our shared heartbeat. Grandpa's face was unreadable, like a mask that gave nothing away. I braced myself for his response, for words that would either confirm my fears or provide some explanation that would make everything okay again. But nothing could prepare me for what he was about to say. Grandpa's eyes met mine. Something indecipherable flashed in them before he folded the newspaper neatly and set it aside. The kitchen, normally a place of warmth and comfort, seemed cold and spacious as the gravity of the moment settled between us. "What about her?" His voice was steady, but there was a tension in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I took a deep breath, palms sweating as I gripped onto the kitchen chair. "I've seen the messages, Grandpa. The ones you exchanged with Urban Rose. They seemed personal." For a moment, the ticking of the old clock on the wall could be heard, and each click cut through the tense air. I watched as Grandpa's expression softened, his shoulders slumped, and he let out a sigh that seemed to contain a load of untold stories. "Sit down, kid," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I obeyed, feeling like a kid summoned to the principal's office, my heart pounding in my chest. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose before looking at me. "I guess it was only a matter of time before someone found out. I didn't want it to be you." I listened, silent and still, as Grandpa began to tell the story of Urban Rose. She was an old flame, a piece of his past that had suddenly come back into his life. They had reunited at a time when he felt most keenly the weight of years gone by, when the future seemed to offer all the same things, a routine that was comfortable but devoid of the excitement of youth. He spoke of his confusion, of the loneliness that sometimes accompanies the later years of life, even when surrounded by family. In his words, it was not an excuse, but an explanation. There was no physical affair, but there was an emotional one, perhaps one that in some ways was even worse. They shared memories, laughter, and a connection he thought was long buried. "You have to understand, I love your grandmother. I've always loved her. But sometimes the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget. It was foolishness, a dangerous indulgence in what-ifs and what used to be." I sat there, my emotions tangled with anger, sadness, and a sudden surge of sympathy. I wanted to be angry, to reprimand him for betraying Grandma's trust, but seeing his vulnerability, his realization of his mistake, it was hard to stay furious. "Are you going to tell her?" I asked, barely audibly whispering. He shook his head, and the wrinkles on his face grew even deeper. "No, I can't do that to her. It would break her heart for no reason. It's over. I ended it as soon as I realized what a mess I'd made. And if she finds out?" The question hung in the air like a ghost of a possible future. Grandfather's gaze was firm, his decision clear. "Then I will accept the consequences of my actions. But I hope, for everyone's sake, that it doesn't come to that." We talked for a long time, and the kitchen filled with the murmur of our voices as we moved into a complex conversation. I learned more about my grandfather in that hour than I had in all the previous years. He was just a man, flawed and searching for meaning in the twilight of his life. As I walked out of the kitchen, I felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The burden had gotten lighter, but it hadn't disappeared. I had promised my grandfather not to tell anyone, and that promise was the right thing to do, but it also carried a weight of responsibility. This confrontation changed something in our relationship. There was a new understanding, a new sadness, but also a glimmer of hope that honesty, even painful honesty, could lead to healing. I only hoped that the trust restored would be enough to keep the family together. The confrontation with my grandfather left an indelible mark on me. I saw the fragility of human nature, the complexity of heartfelt desires, and the sometimes crippling weight of the past. But after our conversation came a quiet understanding, an unspoken pact between us. I would keep his secret on the condition that I would not betray him in the future. Life resumed its rhythm, but with a subtle shift, as if a familiar song was playing in a different key. At family gatherings, I began to watch my grandfather closely, noting how he interacted with my grandmother. He seemed more attentive, more present. It was as if our conversation served as a wake-up call for him, reminding him of what he might be missing. Grandma, for her part, remained oblivious to the storm that had nearly blown over our family. She continued to be the glue that held us together, her laughter and love as abundant as ever. I often wondered if she sensed any change, but if she did, she gave no signs. As for me, as time went on, the weight of secrecy began to loosen. I couldn't forget what I'd learned, but I could deal with it, hide it in a corner of my mind so it wouldn't cloud every interaction with my grandfather. It was a delicate balance, maintaining a semblance of normalcy while at the same time holding something potentially devastating inside me. The months that followed were a testament to our family's resilience. We celebrated holidays, shared meals, and created new memories, all with the tacit agreement that some things were better left unsaid. I realized that family is as much about the joyful moments as it is about the challenges we face and overcome together. I also learned something important about forgiveness and the power of second chances. Grandpa made a mistake, a serious mistake, but he also took steps to correct his course. He chose his family over a fleeting connection to the past, and for that, I found a way to respect him again. My relationship with my grandfather changed as well. There was a new depth to our communication, a mutual respect forged in the fire of truth and vulnerability. He began to share with me stories of his youth, tales of his dreams and adventures, and in these stories, I saw in him not just my grandfather, but a man who had lived a life full of passion and regret, love and loss. In the end, the mystery remained a mystery known only to my grandfather and me. It was a heavy cloak that I wore willingly, realizing that revealing it would do no good. Our family was imperfect, but it was ours, and the love that held us together was stronger than any mistakes. Seasons changed and the secret became part of our story, a chapter in the book of our lives that will remain unread to others, but will be remembered as the time I learned the true complexity of love and forgiveness. As the leaves swirled again, heralding the beginning of a new autumn, I found peace in knowing that despite everything, our family remained intact, bound by something stronger than perfect behavior, bound by love, understanding, and a willingness to protect each other no matter what.